Hello everyone, and welcome to another JavaScript Mastery video. As you know, due to the pandemic, most of the social and work life moved online. That sparked an evolution in video sharing services like Zoom, Google Meet, and many others. Today, you're going to build an app that allows you to video chat with your friends and colleagues just as well as Zoom does. To support this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. With that said, let's jump straight into the demo. I'm going to give this app permissions to use the microphone and the camera. And right away, our camera screen opens. Hey guys. So as you can see, the website itself is pretty straightforward. It is a single page application with a header, a video stream, and some options at the bottom. We'll be using the WebRTC API. WebRTC will allow us to exchange real-time audio and video stream entirely in the browser. To handle peer-to-peer connections, we'll use a library called Peer.js, which is just a simple wrapper. The front-end part, which you can see on the screen, is done using purely react.js and Material UI for the styling, and the backend is consisted of a simple Node.js server. You're not required to know any of these tools, libraries, and technologies. Good JavaScript skills are enough, but of course, if you already know React or Node, that's definitely going to be helpful. Enough talking, let's see how it works. I'm going to enter my name here, let's do JavaScript Mastery, and then finally you can copy your ID. As soon as you click this button, the ID is going to be copied, and then you can send it over to your friend. In this case, I don't want to open another window, so I'm just going to paste it here myself. As soon as you click the call button, you're going to receive a notification about the call. And there we go. JavaScript Mastery is calling. Of course, this would appear on your friend's screen, but we're calling ourselves now, and we can click Answer. And as soon as you click Answer, the second screen is going to appear. Of course, in this case, screens are the same, since both users are on the same computer. But if you have a webcam and you call somebody, your video will appear on the left side, and other person's video will appear on the right side. If you'd like me to add some more features to this app, or if you'd like me to cover a completely different topic, let me know in the comments down below. With that said, let's jump straight into the project. Alongside teaching you WebRTC, I also wanted to let you know about this amazing code auto-completion tool that I started using recently. It's called Tabnine. Tabnine supports all modern programming languages and understands what language you're working in. They have a free forever basic plan, so you can start using it right away. The Tabnine Pro plan is GPU powered and provides better predictions. It's based on the OpenAI's GPT-2 model. Since this model is textual, it can complete natural text too, and not just code. For example, it can suggest completions for to-do comments and even better, suggest code completions based on the to-do comments above them. Tabnine is completely safe. You guys have the option to choose local completions, where the model is held and operated locally in your machine, so no code ever leaves it or leaks out. Or you can choose cloud completions, in which case your code is encrypted on its way out and then immediately deleted. Tabnine uses deep learning to get familiar with your projects and libraries, so the more you use it, you get better code completions, longer and more accurate. The process of installation is incredibly simple. You just have to install a Visual Studio Code extension. During the video, you'll see me use the Tabnine's auto-completions quite often. With that said, let's start creating the project. As always, the first step is going to be to create a new empty folder. Let's do WebRTC Chat App. There we go. When you have the folder, simply open an empty Visual Studio Code window and drag and drop your folder. Great. Now that we're in our code, as always, we're going to go into our view and we're going to open our terminal. This application is going to have two different sides, the front end and the back end. The backend side is going to be a lot simpler, so let's start with that. To initialize our backend application and its corresponding package.json, we're going to run the command npm init-y. There we go. This is going to create an empty package.json file for us. If this command didn't work for you, make sure to install Node.js. You can just Google for Node.js, download, and install it. It is a straightforward process. Now we have to install some of the backend dependencies. In this case, I'm going to run npm install, and let's list all of our dependencies. We're going to need course for cross-origin requests. We're going to need express to start the server. We can also install a handy tool called nodemon, which is going to refresh our server whenever we make some changes. And finally, and most importantly, we're going to install a package called socket.io. Socket.io will allow us to make real-time data connection. With that said, you can press enter, and this is going to install all the necessary dependencies. While that is doing its thing, let's create an empty index.js file. This is going to be our server. Inside of our server, we're going to start using our express immediately. So you can say const app is equal to require, and then in here you can require the express. We have to call that express function one more time, and then we get the application. The second thing that we need is going to be our server. We can get to the server by simply requiring HTTP. That is a built-in node module. And then you can call .createServer and pass in that express application. Now that we have the app and the server, we can also require course. That is going to be a middleware package that we're going to use to enable cross-origin requests. This is going to be extremely useful once we actually deploy our application. Finally, the main part of the video is going to be socket.io. So in here, we can say const io is equal to require socket.io, which we previously installed, and then again, we can call it and pass two different parameters to that function. The first one is going to be the server, and the second one is going to be the options object. Inside of the options object, we're going to have course, and we're going to set the origin to be star. By the way, take a look how Tabnine automatically knew that I wanted to put this. This basically allows access from all origins. And secondly, we want to use methods. So if I start typing methods, take a look. Tabnine automatically knows what I wanted to type. Methods is an array of two strings, get and post. That's amazing. With that said, now we have our IO server-side instance. Okay, you can still see that this course is not being used. So what we can do is say app.use, and then in there, we're going to pass our course and make sure to call it as a function. Of course, at the start, we have a bit of a setup and requires, but we're going to start writing some code really soon. After that, we have to declare our port, and our port is going to be equal to process.env.port. Again, immediately take a look. I just press enter and it is there. Or it is going to be localhost 5000. Again, one thing that Tabnine autofilled for me. Now that we have the port, let's create our first route. app.get, and then in there, this is going to be the root route, and we have the rec and response, and then in there, we're simply going to send something like server is running. This way, when somebody visits our server on localhost 5000, immediately they're going to get this message. Just so we can visit the server, we need to add one more line of code, and that is going to be server.listen. And then in there, we have to provide our port, and finally a function that's going to say console.log, and then inside of there, server listening on port, and let's make that a template string right here, and that is going to be our port. So with this, we are saying that we are listening on that specific port. Great. Now let's run our server by typing nodemon index.js. Server listening on port 5000. I just opened an empty Chrome window and went to localhost 5000, and as you can see, server is running. That means that the current setup is well done. Now we have our server set up, and now we want to focus on the socket.io part of things. We can do that by saying io.onConnection, and then we have a callback function that provides us that specific socket. Sockets are used for real-time data transmission. That data can be messages, audio, or even video, which we're going to do in this video. Right now, we're going to write entire backend socket.io side of things because it has about 10 lines, just so we don't have to go back to this file. After we're done with these 10 lines, we can focus on the front end purely. So what do we want to do first once we connect to that specific socket? Well, we want to emit something. So we're going to call socket.emit, and we're going to emit a me message. Me because I joined, that's my specific user. And then we're going to pass over that socket.id. This is simply going to give us our own ID on the front-end side of things. Then let's add a socket.on, and in this case, we're going to have a disconnect method. On the disconnect, what we want to do is simply broadcast a message. So we can say socket.broadcast.emit, and in here we can do something like call ended. Below that, we're going to have two more socket handlers, socket.on. In this case, we'll have call user. Once this handler is reached, we want to have a callback function, which I'm going to put right there. From the front end, we're going to pass more data to this call user function. And to do that, we can first destructure the data and get all the pieces that we need. Of course, it's hard to say what we're getting right now, but I'm just going to write it out. And then once we get to the front end side of things, it's going to make full sense. First thing that we have is user to call. This is going to be the ID of the user that we want to call. Then we're going to have signal data. Then we have from, and then we have name. Finally, now that we have all of this info, we're going to say io.to user to call dot emit. And what are we going to emit? Well, we're going to emit the call user, and we simply want to pass over all of that data. Signal as signal data, and then we have from, and then we have name. So we're passing all of that so we can get it on the front end side of things. That's all the info that we received from here. And the last socket handler that we need is going to be socket.on answer call. Of course, with all the handlers, we have a callback function. In this one, we're going to receive the data. And what we want to do is say io.to. Then we use data.to because in this case, we didn't destructure it. And then finally, we emit a message. We can emit a message with, let's say, call accepted. And finally, we're going to pass the data.signal. And that is it. This is the entire server-side code needed for our application. Most of the work with WebRTCs and peer-to-peer connections will be done on the front-end side. So let's initialize our empty React application. To initialize our empty React application, we're going to go to View, Terminal, and then we're going to close the server from running by typing Control-C. Now we can run npx create-react-app, and we're going to do /client. So /client. This is going to generate a new React application inside of the client folder. All the code that you can see right here is going to be the backend code, and everything inside of the client folder is going to be our frontend code or React. Let's wait until this is installed, and we'll be right back. Now that our React application is initialized, let's install all the necessary dependencies for the frontend side. We can say npm install. First, we have add material-ui/core, and we also have add material-ui/icons. Then we're going to have a library called react copy to clipboard. We have dashes all in between. Then we're also going to have a library called simple peer. At the start, I might have said we're going to use peer.js, but the name is simple peer. And finally, the most important one is going to be socket.io-client. These are all the libraries that we're going to need for this project. I just noticed that I have a typo. It's going to be clipboard. With that said, let's click enter, and this is going to install all the dependencies. While that is doing its thing, what I usually like to do in all React applications is completely remove the source folder, because we have a lot of stuff that we don't need. So let's remove it, and we can create a new source folder. The file that we absolutely need to have in all of our React applications is going to be the index.js file. Inside of there, we're going to import React from React. We're also going to import React DOM from React DOM. Again, I just want to take a second to tell you, take a look. Tabnine is auto-filling this for me. Then we're going to import app from /app. We don't yet have that component, but we're going to create it. We're also going to import some styles by saying import and then /styles.css. These are going to be the global styles. Finally, we can do react dom.render, and in there we have our app and then document.getElementById, and we have our root div. Basically, our entire React application hooks onto this root div. Okay, with that said, we have to create those two files. That is going to be the app.js and the styles.css. So inside of the source folder, let's create styles.css file. In here, we're simply going to set some basic styling. As you can see, we are setting the background image to the body, and we are removing the margins and paddings from all the elements. I'm going to put the link to these styles down in the description, so you can just copy and paste it. Okay, and now onto the most important file, and that is going to be the app.js. Inside of here, we're going to have a simple React arrow function component. I have an extension called React Snippets, and there I can just type RAFCE, and that creates a React arrow function component. Okay, so for now, in here, let's just say something like video chat app. This is everything that's needed to run our app initially. So we can run it by cding into client and then running npm start. This is going to start our application on localhost 3000. If you can see this background I've chosen and the video chat app in the top left, that means that everything loaded successfully. Of course, you can find your own backgrounds, just find the image online and paste the link inside of the styles. Now let's start creating all the components that we need and the general layout inside of the app.js. First, we're going to import some components from Material UI. If you've never used Material UI, it is simply a UI kit. It's similar to Bootstrap. It gives you some pre-styled components that you can use in your React applications. I'm going to say import typography from @Material UI core. And also inside of there, while we're here, we're going to import the app bar. These are the only two components we'll need in our app.js. Okay, now that we have that, inside of our application, we're going to put some things inside of this div. First is going to be the app bar. Our app bar is going to have a position of static, and it's going to have a color of inherit. Inside of the app bar, we're going to have a typography, and our typography is going to have a variant of h2 as well as the align of center. And it's simply going to say video chat. Again, feel free to change this to anything that you want. Below that, we want to have our video player component. So for now, I'm going to leave a comment saying video player. And below that, we want to have our options component. And that options is going to include notifications component. Notifications is simply that one simple thing that shows up once somebody is calling you. So let's create all of the components, at least their structure for now. To do that, we're going to create a components folder inside of the source folder. And then inside of there, I'm going to create 3 different components. The first one is going to be called video player.jsx. You can also finish it with the .js extension. I just prefer JSX for all the components inside of the components folder. Okay, the second component is going to be the options.jsx component, and the third one is going to be notifications.jsx. For now, all 3 components are going to be simple React arrow functional components. So import React, const notifications, and then we're going to render something. In this case, we're going to render notifications. And we can copy that entire thing and paste it to all three other components. The only things we have to change is the name, the thing that we say inside of the div, and the export. This one is going to be the video player. And the third one is going to be the options. Great. Now that we have those three components, we of course have to import them inside of our app. We can do that by saying import video player from /components and then /video player. We can duplicate this line 2 times and just change this to notifications and change this to options. Now, as you can see, we have three components that are declared but never used, so let's use them. Instead of these comments, I'm going to first call the video player component. It is going to be a self-closing component, and then we're going to have two different components. One is going to be the options. Options this time is not going to be a self-closing tag. The notifications component is going to go inside of the options. You'll see why shortly. To display these notifications correctly, we need to go into our options component and then get something known as children from the props. That way we can render whatever is passed into that component, in this case notifications, right in here. The only thing you have to do is say children. Great. Now let's save everything and check it out in the browser. And with that said, we already have some kind of structure. As you can see, we have a huge video chat at the top. Maybe I zoomed it in a bit. And then we have video player, options, and notifications below. Of course, this doesn't look good yet, but we have to provide some styles. In this video, we aren't going to create separate files for all the styles since there aren't many. So what we can do is we can do that immediately inside of each component. In this case, we're going to import make styles from add material UI core /styles. This is just the way to do styling in Material UI. Finally, below, we can say const use styles is equal to make styles. And then inside of there, we have a callback function that has a theme and returns an object. So this is a mistake. Make sure to wrap these curly braces in another pair of parentheses. That means that we are returning that specific object. This is where our styles are going to go. Considering this video is about video chat applications, WebRTC, and Socket.io, we're not going to waste time typing out styles. So what you can do is down in the description, you'll see a link where you'll be able to immediately simply copy and paste these styles right in here. As you can see, there is not a lot of styles. We have the app bar, we have the image, which I don't think we need, and we have a wrapper. So how do we use those styles? Well, inside of the app, you can say const classes is equal to use styles, and you call it as a hook. We're going to give this div a class name of classes.wrapper. And we're also going to give this app bar a class name of classes.appbar. Let's save it and see it in action. As you can see, this already looks just a bit better. We have our header in the middle, it has a nice whitish background, and all of our components are here. Before we start working on the visual layout of all the components, let's first focus on building all the functionality of Socket.io and WebRTCs. To do that, we're going to create one last file, and that file is going to be inside of the source folder, and it's going to be named socket context.js. I've decided to put all of the socket logic in one file so that it's easier to understand, and it's going to be inside of the React context. That way, everything that we do in this file will be able to share with all the other components. So if you wanted to learn the React context for quite some time now, well, now you have the chance. Let's start by importing a few things from React. Import React. Then in curly braces, we're going to import create context. We're also going to import use state, use ref. We're also going to use refs for video content, and use effect. And all of this is going to be imported from React. Again, Tabnine autofill that for me. As you can see, quite a lot of things here. That's because all of the logic for this project is going to be consisted in this one file, and then we're going to spread it over to all of the components. Then we have to import IO, make sure it is inside of the curly braces, from, and that's going to be socket.io-client. One last thing that we have to import is going to be import peer with a capital P from simple peer. Great, now that we have all the imports, let's create our initial context by saying const socket context is going to be equal to create context. And below, let's create our initial instance of our socket.io. So const socket is equal to io, and now in here, we have to pass in the server. So in our case, that's going to be localhost 5000. Again, Tabnine autofill this for me, just for you to follow. We're creating a variable, we're calling the IO, and we're passing in a string of our server. Once we deploy our application, in here you'll be able to pass the full URL of the deployed server. Below that, we're going to create a React functional component called context provider. And in there, we're going to get the children from props. That is again going to be a functional component. And in here, we're going to have a lot of use states, everything necessary to run our video chats. Before we start writing out all the variables that we're going to need in the use states, let's just create all of the functions that we'll need to make our video chat work. So the first one is going to be const answer call, and that is going to be just a function, of course. Below that, we're going to have another function, which is going to be call user. And we need just one more. The last one is going to be const leave call. These three functions are all of the actions that we need to run our video chat. Finally, we need one big useEffect call. UseEffect is like a component that mounts. As soon as this component mounts, the code inside of it runs. So what do we want to do as soon as our page loads? Well, we want to get permission to use the video and audio from the user's camera and the microphone. We can do that by using the built-in navigator. So we can say navigator.mediadevices.getUserMedia. In there, it accepts an object, and we can say video is going to be equal to true, and audio is going to be equal to true. That returns a promise, so we can just chain a .then on that, and it gives us the current stream. So in here, we get the stream. Of course, we can now create another arrow function, and what we can do is we can set our stream. Once we get it, we want to set it to the state. So to do that, right at the top, we can use the use state field. Use state, we can call it something like stream, set stream, and initially that's going to be set to null. Now that we have this, we can call the set stream and set the current stream. Again, notice how Tabnine already knows what I was about to type. That's crazy. Setting the stream is also not going to be enough. In this case, we have to deal with refs because we immediately want to populate that video iframe with the src of our stream. To do that, we're going to create one use ref. In this case, we can call it something like my video. My video is going to be equal to use ref. That's it. Now that we have that, we can say my video.current.src object, and that's going to be equal to current stream. With this, we're not only setting the current stream to the state, we're also setting it to a ref, which is going to populate our video iframe once we include it in our code. This is all when it comes to requesting permissions from the user, but below we're going to use socket.on. That means that we're going to listen for a specific action. In this case, we're listening for the me action. Remember that on the backend side, we created this socket.emit. This is going to emit our ID as soon as the connection opens. And now on the front-end side, we want to get that specific ID. So we can say here, we get the ID, and what do we want to do with it? Well, we simply want to set it. We want to set it to our state. So we can say something like set me, and we can pass in the ID. Of course, this is going to be a state field, so we need to create another state. In this case, that's going to be me and set me. And at the start, this can be equal to an empty string. We are going to have one more socket.on handler. We can say socket.on. In here, we're going to have a call user. Make sure that this string is exactly as you typed it in inside of our index. Here, call user and call user. On the call user, we of course have to have the handler function. So we can create an arrow function. And then in here, we're going to get a data object. So let's destructure it. We are going to get the from, also name that we can rename to caller name, and finally the signal. So these are the three things that we're going to get. And now, once we have that, let's set all of that to the state. This all is like a single call, so we can name our state something like a call. At the top, we can say const call is equal to set call, and that's going to be equal to use state, and initially that call can be set to, let's do an empty object. Now we can say set call is equal to, we can pass the property called is receiving call, because sometimes a user will be giving a call and sometimes it's going to receive a call. Then we can pass the from that we're getting from here. We can also pass the name as the caller name. And finally, we can pass the signal. Now we have everything that we need to create a call. One really important thing that make sure you don't miss is that this use effect here needs to contain an empty dependency array at the end. Otherwise, it's always going to run, and we don't want that. So again, this use effect, currently line 29, must have an empty dependency array. I know that right now we're writing a lot of logic, and we're not seeing anything happen in the browser. But we're going to write out all the logic for these functions right now, and then we'll be able to just use them later on in the video. So let's continue with the answer call. In here, the first thing that we want to do is set a specific state called setCallAccepted to true. So I'm going to create a new state field called callAccepted and setCallAccepted. And that's going to be equal to useState, and initially that is going to be set to false, just as a Boolean. While we're here, we're also going to have one more state, which is going to be call ended, and we're going to set call ended. As you can see, most of these variables are currently not being used, but we're going to pass them over to all of our components, which will then be able to use them. Now that we have this set call accepted, we can use that in here. And once we answer the call, of course, we want to set the call accepted to be true. Down below, we want to create a peer. We're finally using that simple peer library. We can create a peer by saying const peer is equal to new peer. Okay, and now to create a peer capable of video call, there are a few options that we have to pass. First one is the initiator, and we're going to set the initiator to false because we are not initiating a call, we are simply answering it. Specifically for video chat, we need two different options as well. The first one is going to be trickle, and that is going to be set to false. And we need to pass in our stream. Remember, we got our stream from here when we asked for permissions, and then we set stream to the state so that we can use it right now. Peer is going to behave similarly to the socket. It's going to have some actions and some handlers that are going to happen once we call somebody or answer a call. So in this case, we're going to have peer.on. In this case, it's not going to be on connection, it's going to be on signal. So once we receive the signal. Again, once we receive the signal, we have a callback function that we want to execute. And inside of that callback function, we're going to get the data about that signal. Now we're using sockets intertwined with our peers to finally establish that video connection. So we can say socket.emit And what do we want to emit? Well, the answer call. And that, if you remember, is right here, socket.on answer call. We also need to pass in some data to answer call, and that is going to be signal, which is going to be equal to data. And to, who are we answering the call to? And that is going to be call.from. Great, so this happens once we actually create a signal, but we also need to have another peer.on. This is going to be on stream. In here, we get the current stream, so we can say current stream. Again, that's a handler callback function. And we want to set another ref. The same thing that we did here with my video, now we want to set the other user's video. We can do it by saying user video dot current dot src object. In this case, we're talking about the stream for the other person, not our own stream. Of course, you can see that this user video is not defined. So what can we do? We can just duplicate this line, and from my video, we can call it user video. Again, that's also a ref that we're going to connect with the iframe of that specific video. And one last thing is we're going to call peer.signal, and we're going to put in here call.signal. Again, this call is coming from right here, from our initial socket once we call the user. In there, we're setting that to the state, and we have all the information from that specific call. We know who is calling, from who the call is, what is the signal strength, and are we receiving the call or are we answering the call? So we're setting that as well. And one last thing is one final ref, and that is going to be connection ref.current. We're simply going to set this to peer. That means that our current connection is equal to the current peer who is inside of this connection. For that, we of course have to create yet another ref. And this is the last one, I promise. We can just call it connection ref. Now on to the call user, which is going to be incredibly similar to the answer call. We can basically copy and paste some of the stuff. First of all, we also need to have the peer. So I'm going to copy this peer altogether, but this time the initiator is going to be set to true because we are the person calling. Then we're also going to have peer.onSignal and peer.onStream. So we can copy and paste those two lines in here as well. This time, they're going to be just a bit different. Our peer.onSignal is going to get our data, but this time we're going to emit the call user and not the answer call as we had it before. So we have to pass some different parameters right there. We're going to pass the user to call as the ID. We're also going to pass in the signal data just as data. We're going to say who is the call from, and it is from me. Remember, this is something that's stored in the state. And finally, we're going to pass our own name. We don't yet have that, but we're going to add it as well. So as you can see right now, we're missing two things. We're missing the name and we're missing the ID. How are we going to know which user are we calling? Well, of course, by the ID. So where are we getting the ID from? Well, we're going to pass it right as a parameter inside of this function once we're calling the user. So that's handled. And for the name, that is going to be as simple as adding one more use state. And again, this is the last one, I promise. So we're going to say use state is going to be the name and the set name. And at the start, it's going to be equal to just an empty string. Now, if we save this, our peer.onSignal is done. And let's check our peer.onStream. There, we're getting the current stream and we're setting the user video, so this can remain the same. One last thing when somebody is calling us is that he can decline or accept the call. Remember, on the backend, we have our call accepted, and this is exactly what we're going to use. So right below the peer on stream, we can say socket.on call accepted. And in there, we get the signal. And now the question is, what do we do with that signal? We simply say set call accepted to be equal to true because we accepted that call, and then set peer.signal to be equal to signal. One last thing that we have to do is just copy the last line from the answer call function, and that is to say that the connection ref is now equal to the peer. With that, our call user function is that as well, and that leaves us with one more. This one is, trust me, the simplest as it can be. We're simply going to say set call ended to be equal to true because we ended the call, and then we're going to destroy that connection ref. So we can say connection ref.current. What we're going to do is say dot destroy. This is going to destroy that specific connection. That way, we're going to stop receiving input from the user's camera and audio. One last thing that I did here is I set the window.location.reload. That simply reloads the page and provides the user with a new ID right in here. Why I did that is I simply couldn't get it to work to call another user immediately after hanging up the call with the first user. That way, I simply reloaded the page and then it worked afterwards. Finally, we just have to return something from our context. And the context works in a way that you have this socket context and it has something known as a provider. So just below in the return, we can say return, and there we're going to have a component which is going to be called socket context dot provider with a capital P. Inside of there, we are going to have access to the value object, and everything that you pass in here is going to be globally accessible through all of your components. So basically, we want to pass all of the data from the state, including all of our functions, right down to that value so that we can use it in all of our components. That object is going to be a bit lengthy. We're going to pass a call. Let's do call accepted. We have to pass the refs for my video as well as the user video. We have to pass in all the stream data, the name, the set name, call ended, me, and we also have to pass those three functions we created, which is the call user, also leave call, and finally answer call. Great. Now we have all of the things that we need all across our application. What I personally like to do with lines as long as this one, which is not going to be really important to read later on because these are just variable names, is I use Control, Alt, and then arrow down key to simply select everything, and now we can simply put it in one line by holding Control and then pressing backspace a few times. Great, so now this doesn't take a lot of space. Finally, how context works is that you simply have one thing inside of it, and that is going to be children. That means all of the components that we have in there are going to be inside of that socket wrapped into it. Finally, to be able to use it, we can say export, and we can export the context provider as well as the socket context. Our context is done, and the logic for the entire application is also done. Now we have to see how can we hook this up to our components. To get our context inside of our components, we have to go into our index.js, and there's only one more thing we have to do. We have to import curly braces context provider, and that's going to be from /context. Okay, and in this case, that's going to be socket context. There we go. So now we have access to this context provider. To get all of the values that we passed into our context, which are right here, we have to do one final thing, and that is go inside of the index.js, and then in there we have to import, in curly braces, context provider from, of course, socket context. And now what we have to do is we have to wrap our app with our context provider. Context provider, it is not going to be a self-closing tag. In between is going to be our app. Okay, so we have our app, we have our context provider, and finally we have our document where we set the application to our div root. Now that this is done, we can start creating our video player component. That's the most important part after all. Most of the logic for the video player is done. Now we have to create the video iframe and put that stream we already got into it. We can start by importing some of the components from Material UI. First one is going to be the grid for the layout. Then we have typography for any kind of text elements. Then we have a paper, which is basically a div with a white background. And that's going to be it for now. That's going to be imported from add material UI /core. In this file, we're also going to have some styles. So we can import make styles from add material UI core /styles. In this component, we're going to use our context. So we can say import curly braces socket context from ... and that's going to be our socket context. Okay, and I'm just going to magically copy and paste our styles. Again, the styles for the video player are going to be in the description as well. But generally, what we're doing here is we're specifying the width for the video, the width on mobile devices, specifying how the grid is going to look like on mobile devices. It's going to be all in one column, and it's going to be centered on desktop devices. Finally, our paper is going to have some borders, some paddings, and some margins. As simple as that. Now, inside of here, we're going to have our const classes is equal to use styles, as we had it before. And we're going to start creating our layout. Instead of this div, we're going to have a material UI grid component. The first grid is going to be of a type container, and it's going to have a class name of classes.grid container. Inside of that, we're going to have two different video components. First thing is going to be our own video. So I'm going to say that our own video. And then after that, we're going to have users video. So let's start creating our own video. Our own video is going to be a paper, and that paper is going to have a class name of classes.paper. Inside of that, we're going to have a grid, and this grid is going to be of a type item. It's going to take the full width of the screen on mobile devices, so 12 out of 12 spaces. And on medium and larger, it's going to take half the screen. So on desktop devices, half the screen is going to be your video and half the screen is going to be another user's video. Inside of that grid, we're going to have a typography component. This typography is going to be of a variant H5, and it's going to have a gutter bottom, which is basically just a small margin on the bottom. In there, we're going to have the name of our user. Right now, I'm going to leave it static. And finally, down below, we're going to have our video self-closing tag. Our video tag is going to have a few properties. First one is going to be plays in line. Then we're going to have it muted. It's muted because we want to mute our own video. The second user's video is not going to be muted. Then we have to have a ref. The ref is my video. We're going to set it to autoplay because immediately we want to start receiving the video. And we're going to give it a class name of classes.video. Okay, great. Right now, as you can see, we don't have access to my video. So I'm going to leave that as a string, and we're going to come back to that later. Great. So this is our own video. For other users' video, I'm going to copy this paper and simply paste it below. It's going to be really similar. Class name classes.paper. This is going to be the same. Typography is also going to be the same. And the video, as we said, is not going to have the muted property. And then in here, we have to say user video. Everything else is the same. Great. Now let's save this and let's see how does it look like in the browser. Okay, in the browser, we have one error, and it's saying that it doesn't have the socket context inside of the index.js. So let's check what that is about. Inside of here, we're trying to get the socket context. Maybe we need the / socket context, and we're trying to get the context provider, which we really are exporting. So let's save it one more time and see if it works. Now we're getting a different kind of error, and I just noticed that I have a typo here, create context. We want to create a context. So by going back to the socket context and saying create context right here, And right here, that should fix our issue. Our issue is fixed, but we cannot have refs as strings. So let's go back. And in here, I'm going to simply leave our ref to be null. Hopefully that's going to fix our issue just so we can see our layout. There we go. This loaded. As you can see, we use those papers and those typographies to create these names and this white backgrounds for the video, and we can click allow. This allow comes from, if you remember, from the socket context right here, navigator.mediadevices.getUserMedia. And then this happens if the user allows you to give his video. If you allow it, you're gonna get an error because we didn't yet set the ref inside of this video player. So that seems like a reasonable next step. How are we gonna get all the data from our context that we wrapped our app with? Well, it's going to be simple. Inside of here, just at the top of our component, we can say something like this. Const context is equal to use context, and then in here we pass in the name of our context. In this case, socket context. This context is going to contain all of the variables that we passed in here. Context.call accepted, video, user video, and everything else. In this case, I don't want to repeat myself by saying context, context, context. So we're going to destructure all of the values that we need from this context. You can also see that use context is not imported from the React. So let's do that right here. Okay, so what values do we need from our context? Well, we're going to need our name. We are also going to need our call accepted. We need the my video ref, really important for showing our video. We need the user's video. And we need the call ended variable, the actual stream, and the information about the call. Now we can start using that data. First, we're going to use the name here. We're going to wrap this name in a dynamic JavaScript block, and we're going to say either show our own name, or if the name doesn't exist, then simply show a placeholder of name. Here is our infamous ref, so we can simply say my video ref. This ref is the main connection between our stream and our video component. In here, we're passing in the my video ref. And remember, in here in the use effect, we said my video.current.source object is equal to the current stream. So this is how it works. Now let's continue with using all the variables from the context. Down below, we also want to display the name of the person who is calling. But this time it's not going to be name, it's going to be call.name because that is where the name is consisted. Then this ref is going to be the user video, as we discussed. I see that we still don't use these three variables, and we have to use them to conditionally show these screens. Remember, if you just open your video player, you're not immediately going to be in somebody's call. So we have to show this conditionally. So I'm going to open a code block here. And we're going to say if there is a stream. So only if there is a stream, then render our own stream. Like this. We have to put it inside. Of course, we cannot show something if we don't have a stream. So that's why we have to make sure that we have our stream. I'm going to indent this properly. And that's going to be it for this part. For the user's video, we want to make sure two things are correct. I'm going to again open our code block, and I'm going to say if call is accepted and if call didn't end. Only in that case, we want to show our user's screen. We can do that right here, and I'm going to indent this properly. There we go. That part is done. Now we're showing conditionally our own stream if there is a stream, and we're showing other user screen if the call is accepted and if it hasn't ended. Now let's save it and see it in action. I'm going to reload the page and take a look. We're here, we're live. I'm speaking right here to you into this microphone and you can see me typing. Great. So currently we can only see my own screen because I click allow to give the video and audio permissions. But now we have to create this options component so that we can see the other person's screen. Let's do that right away. To create the options component, we're gonna go to that specific component, and we're gonna start by importing a few things from Material UI. We're gonna say import. We need a button, a text field, which is basically an input. We need a grid, a typography, as well as the container and the paper. That's it. So we're importing this from, and that's going to be at Material UI /core. Inside of here, we're also going to import that make styles, because we'll use a lot of styles in this file, from at Material UI /core /styles. Okay. In this file, we're also going to say import curly braces copy to clipboard. This is an import from, and that's going to be the react-copy to clipboard. Okay, let's make sure that we have this installed. So if we go to package.json, all the dependencies should be here, but for some reason they're not. I think I ran the command to install the dependencies inside of the main folder and not inside of the client folder. So we have to cd into client. And one more time, if you ran the command with me in the main folder, you can press the arrow up key a few times, and then you'll see this entire line, and you'll be simply able to press enter, and that's going to install all the necessary dependencies, but this time in the client folder. While that is installing, we can open the package.json of the backend folder, because now we have a few dependencies extra here that we don't need. We don't need Material UI on the backend side. We don't need React copy to clipboard, and we also don't need socket.io client. So we can get rid of all of these. Great. Now that that is done, we can go back in here and we can again start our React application. In this file, we're also going to use a few icons from Material UI. So that's going to be import assignment icon. We also have the phone and phone disabled icons. And that's going to be imported from at Material UI /icons. And of course, we need our context. So we can say import curly braces socket context, and that's going to be imported from /socket context. In this file as well, we're going to have some styles. So I'm simply going to paste them right there. But again, you know the drill. In the description, you'll see all of these styles for the options component that you'll be able to simply copy and paste right in here. Great. That allows us to start working on the layout and of the logic of the options component. First things first, we're going to get a few things from our context. So as we learned, its const context is equal to use context. And now inside of there, we can pass in our socket context. Let's see if we imported the use context. I don't think we did. So we're going to do it right now. And we can also immediately destructure the things that we're going to use. We're going to use the me, that's my special ID. We're going to use the call accepted, name, as well as the set name here, because in the options, this is the place where you will actually set the name. Then we need the call accepted boolean, leave call function, and call user. As you can see, most of the functions are here. Okay, I see that I have call accepted already. I meant to type call ended. So we need to have access to both call accepted as well as the call ended. Inside of here, we're also going to have one special use state field, and that is going to be ID to call, as well as the set ID to call. That's going to be equal to use state, and at the start, it is going to be equal to an empty string. Now we can import that use state at the top. We're going to have a text field, and in that text field, you'll be able to pass in the ID of the person you want to call. One final thing is const classes is equal to use styles. Now we can start creating the layout. First, we're going to have our container. So we're not going to have a div. It's going to be a container with a class name of classes. You guessed it, container. Then we're going to have a paper. That paper is going to have the elevation of 10, which is simply going to make it seem raised. and it's going to have a class name of classes.paper. Again, Tabnine autofilled that pretty nicely. Then we're going to have a form component. That form is going to have a class name of classes.root. It's also going to have a property of no validate and the autocomplete off. Inside of the form, we're going to have a grid. This time, grid is going to be of a type container, and it's going to have a class name of grid container. We are also going to have a grid of type item, so we can specify it right now. And it's going to take the full width on the small devices, and it's going to take half the width on medium or larger devices. Finally, it's going to have a class name of classes.padding, simply to add some padding to it. Inside of that grid, we're going to have a typography. And that typography is going to have a property of gutter bottom and a variant of age 6. We're going to close that tag, and inside of there, we're going to say account info. So this is a header. So below it, we're going to have fields that correspond with account info. In this case, it is going to be one text field. And that text field is going to be a self-closing tag that is going to have a label equal to name. It's also going to have a value equal to name, and it's going to have an onChange handler. That onChange handler is going to accept a callback function with the event, and we're simply going to call setName equal to e.target.value. That way, we are setting the value of our name right as we type it. One last property that it's going to have is going to be full width. This simply makes this text field take a full width of the corresponding container. Below that, still inside of the grid, we're going to have our copy to clipboard component, and it accepts a few things. First of all, it accepts a text property, which is going to be me, simply the ID of my specific socket. It's also going to have a class name of classes.margin. Inside of there, we're going to specify a button, and that button is going to be of a variant type contained, and it's going to have a color of type primary. It also has a few extra things like full width. It's also going to have the start icon property with curly braces, and there you can say assignment, and you can self-close that tag, and it's going to have a font size of large. Okay, let's make sure this is spelled assignment like this, and let's save it, and let's take a look how does it look like right now. As you can see, we have nice paper here for options, account info header, name, and then in here we have a button to copy that specific text. Let's continue. Inside of that button, we're simply going to say copy your ID. And that is going to be it for this grid. But now we're going to have one more grid, and that is going to be a grid for making a call. So what we can do is we can copy this entire thing and simply paste it below. Only a few things are going to change. First of all, it's not going to be account info anymore. It's going to be make a call. Then inside of there, this text field is not going to be name. It's going to be ID to call. For that reason, we have to change this value here to ID to call. And we also have to change the set name to be set ID to call, like this. And then below that, we're not going to copy anything. We are going to have a button, but that button is going to be different depending on the state. Are we in the call right now or are we not? So what we can do is get rid of this completely. Inside of here, open a new JSX block, and we're going to say, is call accepted? And if call is not ended. In that case, we want to show some specific JSX here. If that's not the case, so if call is not accepted or if call is ended, in that case, we want to show some other JSX here. Okay, in both cases, that's going to be a button. So I'm going to create a button component right there. And this button is going to say hang up. So we simply want to close the call, finish it, that's it. But this only shows if we are in the call. If you're not in the call, what do we have in here? Well, we have a button, but that button says, now let's start adding some properties to the first button. That's going to be a variant of contained. And take a look how Tabnine automatically wants to fill this out for me. It learned that I previously had the variant contained and color primary and full width with this button. So it learned that and it started recommending that for me. That's amazing. So I'm going to say contained right there. But this one is going to be just a bit different. The color is going to be secondary. It is going to have a start icon. And take a look, it autofilled this for me. It's not going to be assignment. It's going to be phone disabled. Okay, this is starting to get hard to read. So I'm going to put this into multiple lines just so we can read it more easily. What else do we need on this button? Well, we need a full width property. We need an on-click property. So what's going to happen once we click this? Well, we want to call that function to leave the call. Remember, leave call function is in the socket context right in here. It does this logic and we're passing it through the context into our options right here. So we're calling that. And the last thing that we want to have is class name of classes.margin. Okay, so some of the properties on the second button are going to be the same, but not all of them will. For now, I'm going to copy all of them, and then we'll see what needs to be changed. The second button is going to be contained, but the color is going to be primary. It's not going to be phone disabled, it's just going to be phone. Full width is going to stay. On click, we don't want to leave the call, we want to call the user. So what we can do is create an arrow function, and then inside of there, we're going to say call user and paste the ID to call. Question for you. Why did we have to do it like this? Why did we have to put a callback function and then call our function? Why didn't we simply immediately call user like this? It is a valid syntax, right? The answer is that if you have it like this, it doesn't wait for the on-click. It automatically does this. So it's reading the code, it's saying, okay, this is a button, it's primary, it's start icon, it's full width, and then goes into here, and JavaScript just reads this as a function call. We don't want that. For that reason, we need to leave it like this. Okay, that's it for the button. And then again, since this is the code that's simply going to, stay like this, it's not some logic that we have to read often. What I like to do is again, just put it in one line like this. It's a lot easier to read. Okay, let's see how does it look like in the browser. That's already starting to look much better. You can see we have the account info, we have the screen right there, and we have make a call. Soon enough, we'll be able to make a call to a different computer. So first of all, I see that this button is not full width. So let's go back and let's just add that full width property at the end. Looks like while I was trying to put this into one line, it all connected together. So we're just going to fix that. Full width on click right there. And that looks good to me. Let's save it and see it. Okay, that looks much better. Really, really good. We can even open the inspect element and see how does it look like on mobile. As you can see, it's fully mobile responsive. What I have to say is that I've tested it on mobile devices and it mostly works, but sometimes on slower mobile devices, the stream simply stops. So just letting you know that. Now we want to show this notifications component inside of this options paper. We can do that by first of all removing this and then finally bringing this children inside of the paper component right in here. That way it's going to show inside. Let's save it and take a look. Okay, as you can see, this notifications was immediately lifted right inside of here, inside of this options component. Now, it would be great if we could test this already just by making a call, but we can test a few things. We can test the name. So if I start typing something like Adrian, okay, so the name field seems to be working perfectly. Let's test out the copy ID button. So I'm going to click it and I'm going to paste right here. Okay, this is definitely not our ID, so that means that something is broken with the copy your ID button. Or more specifically, something seems to be broken with the copy to clipboard. We're gonna leave that as it is right now, just so we can finish the notifications component. As soon as we're done with that, we're gonna test it all together and make sure to fix that copy to clipboard issue. Sometimes when some components are related, by going to fix or implement another thing, actually it fixes the previous thing you were working on. So hopefully that's gonna happen for us as well. With that said, we're going to move to our notifications component, and it's going to be a simple one to implement. We're gonna just import one thing from Material UI, and that thing is going to be the button. So import button from, and then again, Tabnine comes in handy from Material UI /core. Great. Inside of here, we're also gonna want to get some things from the context, so we can import socket context from dot slash, or no, it's dot slash socket context. Great. And what do we need? Well, we need the answer call function. We need the call, all the information about the call, and we need the Boolean call accepted that's going to tell us whether the call has been accepted. We get that using the use context and passing in the socket context. Of course, I'm missing an equal sign here. And of course, we have to import the use context from React. Okay, now let's just fill in this JSX. We're gonna have an empty React fragment. And then inside of there, we're gonna check if we have a receiving call. We can do that by saying call that is receiving call, and if call has not yet been accepted. If that is the case, we want to show some JSX. So the JSX in here, let's say it's a div, is going to show only if we have a receiving call and if the call hasn't already been accepted. In this div, we don't need to create some Material UI styles, so I'm simply going to put inline styles in this case. That's going to be display of flex, and we're going to have a justify content of center. Inside of there, we're going to have an h1 tag, and we can simply say call.name and then is calling like this. And then we want to have a button. And then a user who's being called will be able to take the call or not. So we can say button, variant is going to be contained, color is going to be equal to primary, and then on click, again, take a look how Tabnine is learning. That's crazy. On click is going to be equal to answer call, and we can have answer right there. That's going to be it for our notifications component. Our notifications is inside of here. You can see it if we go to app.js. We have options and then notifications, and it should only appear if we are receiving a call. So now let's try to test our entire application and see what is wrong with this copy to clipboard. Let's reload the page. I'm going to type in my name, and I'll click copy your ID and paste it right there. Okay, that still didn't copy it. It just used what I have copied earlier. So we want to make sure why this is not working. And this is going to be a nice debugging session. First, I'm going to Google npm react copy to clipboard just so I can see if maybe I misused that package. Then in here, you can see we installed it properly. And this is the demo. We just have to wrap something with it and provide the text that we want to copy. And in here, they have a specific state if we want to know when we copied something. But in this case, we don't need that. So it looks like to me that we use this in the right way. So why is it not copying it? Well, let's go back into code. And then in here, I want to console.log me. I want to see if this indeed is an ID that's coming through our context. Maybe it's not coming through correctly. So if we console log this, go back to your website, reload the page, and now we're going to open our inspect element. As you can see here, we got an empty string. So I was right. We don't have anything to copy. And you can see failed to connect. So in this case, we got one of the easiest bugs to fix, and that is we forgot to run our server at the same time while running our client side. So let's go back to the code, open a terminal, and then in here, we can say nodemon index.js. Make sure you're in the root folder. Now our server is running, and it will provide us with this me ID. These issues happen. That's completely normal. So let's save it, go back, And as you can see, we have this ID right there. So now if I type in my name, Adrian, if I copy ID and paste it, take a look, we have it. So the question of the day is, will this work? Let's try it out. I'm gonna click call, and instantly we received Adrian is calling. I'm gonna answer the phone, and in a mere second, a second screen appeared, and you can see that we have the live stream on both sides. Of course, this is not all that interesting because we have two of the same screens, but if you had your friend on a different computer with a different webcam, and if you simply clicked copy your ID, send that to him, and he was the one to enter it here and make a call, you would have a nice looking Zoom clone, Google Meet clone, or whatever you want to call it. This looks amazing and works perfectly. Again, we can also inspect the screen and see how does it look like on mobile devices. As you can see, looks pretty damn good. And let's test if we can hang up the call. And you saw that there was a refresh for a split second. I did that because now we're gonna get a different ID that we can use to call this person. That is great. And this name is automatically being updated right in here. That works as well. Okay, so this is all amazing. The last thing to do is to deploy it. The deployment process is going to be a bit different than deploying usual React apps, because in this case, we have to deploy our server. For that, we're going to use Heroku, and then we have to deploy our front-end part. So let's deploy our website so that you can actually share your live link with your friends, colleagues, or potential employers. We're going to start with deploying the backend side, and for that, we're going to use Heroku. The steps are as follows. You can go to sign up or log in. Once you get inside of your dashboard, you're going to see all of the projects that you have here. And in this case, we're going to create a new app. Let's go with something like video chat app. Okay, that's not available. Let's do JSM for JavaScript mastery. And I'm going to create that app. Finally, we have to deploy it. And the process is going to be pretty straightforward. There are some things that can complicate things, but you have this nice guide right there, how to deploy it using Git. So we're just going to follow the steps. First, you'll want to download and install the Heroku CLI. You can click the link, and there you'll be able to download it for your own operating system. Once you download and install it, we can just proceed with the steps. First things first, we're going to do a Heroku login. So back in my code, I'm going to stop my server from running, clear everything, also going to stop the front-end side, and let's see what do we have. From time to time, I want to clear all the windows just so we know where we are, and collapse all the folders. Our whole project is done. So one thing that we have to do to deploy this with Heroku is we have to add a so-called proc file. So it's just going to be literally proc file with a capital P without any extensions. And then in there, you need to say web node index.js. This is the command to run your server. Inside of the package.json, it's also always good to add some scripts. So inside of the scripts, we can say a start script. When we do start, we want to do node index.js. Okay, that works. So now everything inside of the code is done. We can open our terminal. Make sure you are on the root of your folder, not in the client side, so not inside of here. And then in here, we're going to simply paste Heroku login. It's going to say press any key to open up in the browser. It's going to ask you to log in again and authenticate. Then you're going to get a message that says you're logged in. The second step is to create a new Git repository. So let's do that by running git init, and then we can copy this command. And then we can paste what we copied, and that is Heroku git remote, and then that. Right now I'm getting a message that I have too many active changes. And that's because our whole node modules is in our Git folder. You never want to do that. So what you can do is create one new file called .gitignore. And then in there, say node_modules. This is going to remove node modules from the active subset of changes in Git. So node modules are never going to be pushed to Git. Okay, so that handles that. We copied the next command that we saw right inside of here. and let's run it. After we do that, that seems fine to me, no errors. And the last step is to run git add, git commit, and then git push. So git add, git commit, let's say deploy to Heroku, and git push. In this case, we cannot simply say git push, we have to do git push Heroku master. I typed in that command, pasted it, clicked enter, and it's running. Right now, our backend is being deployed as we speak to Heroku. Our build succeeded, and we can control-click right in here to open it. Video chat app JSM herokuapp.com. If I zoom in, you can see that we get servers running, which means everything is successfully set up. Now let's copy this URL here and go to our client side, inside of the SRC, inside of the socket context. Before, we were running our server right in here, localhost 5000. But what you want to do right now is simply paste our new deployed server. Once that is done, our frontend is also ready to be deployed. We are going to deploy the frontend side with Netlify. Again, the process is the same, simply log in or sign up. In this case, go to Sites and scroll all the way down. This time, we're going to navigate to the client side, cd client, and then you're going to run npm run build. This is going to prepare the optimized production build that we can then deploy to the web. As you can see, a new folder appeared. So basically, it's going to take all of your components, all the JS files, and it's going to bundle them into one single index.html file with one single CSS and JS file. Of course, if you want to, you can go to the public index.html. You can change this from just React app to your own title. You can also change the favicons, logos, and so on. Our build is done. So now right-click it, click Reveal in File Explorer or Open in Finder, and simply drag and drop the build folder right into here. The process is going to be extremely quick, if not instantaneous. And there we go, our app is already online. Before we take a look at it, go to Site Settings, change site name, and then in here, you can name it to anything you want. Let's do chat, app, JSM, video, something like that. There we go, it's saved, and to visit it, you can simply go right there and take a look. It's asking me for video and microphone permissions. I'm going to allow it. We are back in here. Hello, nice to see you. And let's see if it works. Okay, I'm going to copy the ID and paste it. Again, you wouldn't paste this yourself. You are going to copy this ID and then send it over to your friend, or you can ask your colleague or friend to send his ID. But now, for testing purposes, I'm going to click right there. JavaScript Mastery is calling. Let's answer the phone. And in just a few seconds, our stream appeared. That is it. We successfully built and deployed our application. It's online for everybody to see. You can put it in your portfolio, share it, and use it. And one more time, I gotta say thank you to Tabnine, not just for sponsoring this video, but also for creating such an amazing auto-completion tool. As you saw, I'm using it all the time. With that said, thank you so much for watching. To make sure not to miss the next video, like and comment on this one, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, and more importantly, turn on the notifications by clicking the bell icon. Stay safe, and see you in the next one.